The Legend of Zelda is one of the most iconic game franchises ever. This franchise is filled with so many memorable moments, from the final showdown against Ganon in Ocarina of Time, to waking up in the Shrine of Resurrection in Breath of the Wild, or even being scared shitless by Dead Hand. Ugh. Most Zelda games have one big iconic moment that defines the game. Each of these moments is usually the first thing you think of when you see their respective game, and most of them are so recognizable that even people who have never played a Zelda game before will know them. I thought it would be fun to show off some of the most iconic parts of each Zelda game, and why each is so iconic. Before getting into that though, remember this is mostly my opinion, and you can disagree with these pickings. And if you have your own iconic moments, make sure to comment them down below. With that said, we start with the game that started it all, The Legend of Zelda. Zelda 1 is lacking in memorable moments. The game is super gameplay based, and no weight is given to many of your actions. Even killing Ganon himself isn't that satisfying, since he just crumbles into dust and you move on to the next room. However, there is one part of the game that everyone who has played a Zelda game knows by heart. It's dangerous to go alone. This old man and his sword are by far the most well-known part of the first Zelda game, and it has been referenced again and again in future Zelda games, solidifying this line into video game history. Zelda 2 is also extremely forgettable. It's easily the weirdest Zelda game, and not in a good way. This series was still getting its start at this point, and this game broke everything that made a Zelda game a Zelda back then, and it's still broken to this day. The only game that comes close to mimicking its weirdness is the CDI games. This isn't a game that many people look back fondly on. However, there's one part that you may remember: Dark Link. Easily the only good part of this game is the final boss, Dark Link, a final one-on-one fight with the darkness inside yourself to prove yourself worthy of the Triforce of Courage. This has been the only part of Zelda 2 that has stuck in the series, easily making it its most iconic moment. Link to the Past is the first game in the series to have multiple well-known moments, from being teleported to the Dark World by Aghanim for the first time, to the final boss sequence. This game actually has moments that are built up to be cinematic, unlike the first two games. I think the most iconic moment in this game is when you head to the Lost Woods and finally pull the Master Sword, one of the most well-known weapons in gaming. This is the first game to feature the Master Sword, and the sequence to get is pretty memorable, as well as its pulling cutscene being really cinematic for a 2D Zelda game. All these factors place it on this list. Link's Awakening doesn't really have a super well-known moment. The best moments are when Link and Marin sit on the beach, and when Link plays the instruments to wake the Windfish. Overall, it's not a game with that well-defined of a moment, with most of its major story beats happening in dialogue. Now we get into a bit of a meme game. The most iconic moment of, ironically, a very well-known game at this point, known as Link the Faces of Evil, is Morshu. Known for his iconic line,
"Rope? Bombs? You want it? It's yours, my friend, as long as you have enough rubies." Sorry, Link, I can't give credit. Come back when you're a little, richer.
Next up is one of the most revolutionary games of all time, Ocarina of Time. This game is completely filled with some of the most famous moments in gaming, with some notable moments being when Link first meets Zelda, when Link pulls the Master Sword for the first time, the bottom of the well, the ending cutscene, the title screen, and every time Navi opens her damn mouth. Hey! However, there is a clear and easy pick for the most iconic moment: Ganon. The final fight against the King of Darkness is amazing, and the cutscenes that start and end the fight are some of the most cinematic moments in the series. Seeing the colossal pig beast for the first time is awesome, and this game starts the trend of Ganon having some of the most brutal deaths in video game history, usually being stabbed in the forehead. Overall, this final boss fight and sequence is super well known and super awesome. How can you argue with this? I, unfortunately, have not played Majora's Mask yet, but it isn't particularly known for many epic moments, with many of its best moments being character-based or in side quests, and some other memorable moments usually being sad cutscenes or the many mysteries of the game. The most iconic moment in terms of epicness that most people remember would have to be Fierce Deity Link versus Majora, since both of these characters are some of the most mysterious in the series, and both being extremely famous. The Oracle games are not remembered as much as other Zelda games, and they don't really have an iconic moment. The only thing an average Zelda fan would know about them is the linked ending where you fight Twin Rover and botched resurrected Ganon. Other than that, the games don't really have a memorable moment. The cartoony Wind Waker is one of the most popular games in the series with plenty of famous moments in it. Some examples are the Forsaken Fortress rescue, the Leafy profile picture, and Ancient Hyrule. Ancient Hyrule is one of the coolest locations in the series, despite not being more than a dungeon. However, in Old Hyrule, there is the Ganon fight. I know it's a cop-out to choose the final Ganon fight again, but come on, how can you not disagree with the Wind Waker final boss being the most famous in the series? This is the fight where Zelda gets bitch slapped by Ganon, while he has one of the goofiest faces ever, and ending with Ganon getting stabbed through the forehead and giving one of the coolest speeches in the series. It's a clear winner. Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures are the worst selling Zelda game. It's the most forgotten real Zelda game that isn't Triforce Heroes, and it's apparently a pain to play not on an emulator and in a way that's fun. This game is so forgotten that I still can't figure out whether they're separate games. There isn't a good iconic moment for this game, so I guess I have to go with the final boss. I know it's a cop-out, but you'd be lying if you could think of a better iconic moment. Our line of relatively unknown Zelda games continues with the Minish Cap. This is another game that didn't sell too well and isn't super well remembered, and it doesn't have that much importance in the rest of this series other than introducing Vati. Unfortunately, we have to go with the cop-out choice, the final boss. However, this final boss is pretty interesting, since it starts as a race against time to save Zelda's life, before Vati kills her, and you can actually have Zelda die if you take too long fighting the Dark Nuts. Once you finally get to the top of the tower, you face off against the Wind Mage himself in a pretty epic showdown where he transforms into Eldritch Horrors. However, once you beat him, it just becomes the standard Zelda ending of everyone lives happily ever after. We finally get to an actually interesting Zelda game in Twilight Princess. This is one of the most cinematic Zelda games, and has quite a few memorable moments inside of its cutscenes. Quite a few of its notable moments would include the Fourth Light Spirit's Interloper cutscene, known for whatever the hell this is, Zant taking over Hyrule Castle, Ganon getting brutally stabbed through the chest, and Ganondorf's execution. However, the most iconic moment has to be after the first fight with King Bulblin on the Bridge of Eldin. After a kind of awful boss fight in my opinion, Link finally saves one of the kids from the prologue, and pulls a horse wheelie in victory atop the bridge during sunset. It's also the title screen which doubles its recognizability. Phantom Hourglass is not memorable. It didn't do bad sales-wise, and it has an interesting story, but just so much of it isn't that memorable. Honestly, can you even remember who the villain is? No? Well, it's Malladus. The story is basically Link and Tetra exploring the Great Sea for a land to rebuild Hyrule on directly after the Wind Waker. Also, the game takes place over roughly 20 minutes in the Zelda universe, since Oshus has time powers, apparently. Link must help Oshus kill Malladus, except that isn't his name, it's actually Bellum, some weird-ass parasite ripping off Baronade. The only moment I think anyone who hasn't played the game might recognize is after the end, when Oshus reveals himself to be a huge-ass whale. Or the dungeon you have to play through 10 times, take your pick. Spirit Tracks is another Wind Waker sequel that just exists. This game does have more of a memorable story in my opinion, with better characters, but it's still not an absolute icon of Zelda. Even the final boss isn't that memorable, with the midget who summons the final boss being far more interesting. Easily the most iconic part of Spirit Tracks is the fact that Zelda, yes, the Zelda, the one that the games are named after, straight up dies in this game. I guess technically she's still alive in ghost form, but she still died. The only other thing that comes close is the stupid pipes and blowing into the mic. Finally, a Zelda game that most people would know, for some not so great reasons.
These mushrooms here. It's very simple.
For as much as this game isn't looked back fondly on, it was the most graphically impressive Zelda game at the time, and it still has some great moments in it. The whole intro with Zelda, the Imprisoned, every single moment of Girahim, the Imprisoned, the Silent Realms, every moment with Groose, the Imprisoned, and Kaloctos, just to name a few. However, by far the most important and best moment in this game is Demise. This fight is just awesome. It's a one-on-one fight with the Demon King himself, the most evil being in Hyrule. Everything about it is awesome, and once you finally beat him, he does what is possibly the most important thing that happened in Zelda history. He curses Hyrule to always have a reincarnation of his hatred, and a reincarnation of the spirit of the hero and Hylia in Hyrule, setting up the entire series and their different Links, Zeldas, and singular Ganondorf, and maybe even a few other recurring characters like Beetle and Tingle. Overall, it's just such an important and awesome moment of the game. The spiritual remake of Link to the Past, A Link Between Worlds, has a few of the same moments of the first game, but this game has a completely different story and different events, so the best moment would either have to be the ending, or when Yuga and Lorule is first introduced. Of the two, I think the ending is more well known, since it's a huge showdown against Ganon, but this time he's possessed by Yuga. Surprisingly, this design does not give me nightmares like when Cackled fused with Bowser. Finally, we get to the most recent games in the franchise, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. With 99% of these games being optional, there aren't too many great story moments. In Breath of the Wild, the game's story is super laid back, and most of the cutscenes with major characters kinda suck in terms of being iconic and memorable. Most of these cutscenes are literally just characters standing around and talking. It's not that much more. All of the best parts of these games are the mysteries of its world and exploring it, but I wouldn't call places like the Zonai Ruins, Forgotten Temple, or the 8th Heroine iconic, and most of the story beats don't hit that hard, even the huge awesome mechanical robots. Even the final boss of the game, while epic, it doesn't really compare to the other game's finale. It's probably because Link doesn't do an awesome finisher, it's just Zelda nukes Calamity Ganon. Even if Breath of the Wild did have a conventional awesome moment, nothing can compare to this. This is peak gaming right here. This might be one of the best moments in all of Zelda. Can you really argue with this? Tears of the Kingdom operates in much of a similar way since it follows basically the exact same story structure, just with more and better dungeons. Unfortunately, this game doesn't really have good iconic world elements since it kind of ruins or barely adds anything to previous world elements. It also has some better cinematic cutscenes. However, the most iconic moment has to be the intro sequence, specifically Ganon's awakening. This part of the game is iconic partly because it's the intro to the second best-selling Zelda game of all time, and partly because this is the only part of the game we saw for 2 to 3 years before we got an actual trailer. Walking down the hallways and seeing the ancient stonework is awesome, even if this is the best the game gets in terms of mystery, and we finally get to see Ganondorf. I mean, this is awesome. Once Ganon reawakens, he is just amazing, setting up many of the mysteries of the game. Sadly, most of this setup goes down the drain since Ganon is barely present in Hyrule, and the Zonai get barely explained, and the game is extremely disconnected from every other Zelda game, even its prequel, but the intro still holds up really well. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Comment your guys' favorite iconic moments down below, and like and subscribe. With that said, see you guys next time.